Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the next video on the tour of the cell. So let's go through and look at this next video. So let's try to review cell theory here. Now the first part of cell theory is all organisms are composed of one or more cells. In order to be an organism, you have to have cells, which are the smallest unit of life. We have to have at least one of those cells. We'll go through and talk about prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms and single cellular and multicellular organisms, but all organisms are composed of one or more cells. The second thing here is cells are the basic unit and structure and organization in organisms. So it's important to understand that this is the fundamental unit of what you are made out of. The macromolecules go through and they really form the cells that make you up, but the fundamental structure or organization of your body are cells. Now the next thing, all cells come from pre-existing cells. So all of the cells in your body have come from your parents, and all of those cells have come from cells, and all of those cells have come from cells, etc., etc. So understanding that all cells come from pre-existing cells is really, really crucial to understanding this theory. Now, let's try to think about what a cell is again. Well, a cell is the smallest unit of life. If we were to look at different types of cells, we could see in these images here, we have neurons and red blood cells and white blood cells. And really, when we're thinking about cells, we're thinking about molecular biology, and we're trying to think about the scale, a very, very small thing that is making up our body and coming together with trillions and trillions and billions of other cells to go through and form organisms. So when we're thinking about the size of cells, well, cells are extremely small. And when we think about it, well, cells are micrometers in length. 1 micrometer is equal to 1 divided by 1,000,000 meters. So the typical cell size is somewhere between 1 to 100 micrometers in diameter. And think about that. In a die, like the die that you would play with in a game, well, that's about 1 centimeter cubed. So we're talking about very, very small things. So if we're zooming in, well, we can see here, well, we have a coffee bean. Here's a sesame seed bean. This is if you were to write 12-point font in times on your piece of paper, and here's a grain of rice. Now, as we go through and zoom in, and zoom further and further in, there's a grain of salt. If we continue to go, we have amoebas. And finally, as we go through and zoom in here, now we're starting to get to single cellular organisms and cells. Now, what we see here is the human egg. And this is going to be the largest cell in our bodies, and we can see here next to it is a sperm cell. Now as we go further and further in, we can see here's a skin cell. We can see it's much smaller than that human egg, and we also have a red blood cell here, which is in your blood. If we continue to delve a little bit deeper here, what we can see is now we're getting to bacterium, a unicellular organism here, and now we're getting into organelles. Here's a mitochondrion, we have a lysosome, here's a chromosome, which is your coiled DNA. And if we continue to delve a little bit deeper, what we can see is there's our mitochondrion here. Here is our bacteria, or a virus here, a phage. We have an HIV and a hepatitis virus, and now we're starting to get into viroids. Now if we really, really continue to go a little bit deeper, now we can see the size of ribosomes, antibodies. Here we can see another macromolecule that we looked at. There's a phospholipid. So there's the size of a phospholipid here. Here's a glucose. And then now we can see all the way down here. Here is our carbon atom. And here's our water molecule. So we can see carbon, compared to all of these things, it makes up, all these atoms are going to make up these macromolecules in these cells. But we can see that as we go through and zoom out, cells relative to other things are very, very small. But then the organelles and the macromolecules that make them up are even smaller. And we can see that as we zoom out here, how much smaller these cells are compared to our coffee bean, our 12-point font, and our grain of rice. And we can see how small carbon is compared to all of this. So all cells have organelles. And when we're thinking about organelles, organelles are specialized structures that perform specific functions inside the body of the cell. Now, the organelles that you guys have seen, well, this is going to be the cytoplasm, the nucleus, the nucleolus, the nuclear envelope, the vacuoles, the lysosomes, the cytoskeleton, the centrioles. And then if we continue to go further, ribosomes, the ER, the GA, the Golgi apparatus, the chloroplast, the mitochondria in the cell wall, the cell membrane, cilia, and flagella. And these are all organelles that come together. Again, they're made out of macromolecules, they're made out of proteins, they're made out of different lipids, and they form these parts of the cell, and then all of these parts will go through and come together. And when they all form together, then we get the fundamental unit of a cell. So let's go through. This is an animal cell. This is a picture of an animal cell. Let's just try to delve into some of the parts here. We're not really going to specifically talk about what the parts of the cell are, but what we're going to do right now is just kind of identify where they are. The first and most obvious is going to be the nucleus. And the nucleus is going to go through and hold the genetic information, but it's going to be that center circular blob. If you look at it under a microscope, it's the easiest thing for you to see. Now within that, we have the nucleolus. And this is really going to be responsible for ribosome production and also going through and providing a little bit of protection for our DNA. Now, if we delve a little bit further, we get into the endoplasmic reticulum. And this is butted up against the nucleus and nucleolus because it's going to go through and there are ribosomes on it. The rough ER, the reason it's rough is because it has all these little tiny spots, and these spots are ribosomes. And the smooth ER, it's going to be a little bit further out from the nucleus, but it's not going to have these ribosomes. Now, the reason it's butted up there is because as we go through and produce these ribosomes in the nucleolus, they're going to go through and they're going to meld in with our rough ER. Now, the second most obvious thing to identify in a cell, and the one that most students remember, is the mitochondrion. And mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And they kind of look like little bacteria inside the cell. And we'll talk about why they look like those little bacteria. But they kind of have this folded membrane in the center, and that's going to be the cristae. Now, these little spots, I've already kind of talked about them a little bit. These are the ribosomes. And these ribosomes are really, really important for protein production to make up other solid parts in the body and produce proteins in our body. Now, the next thing here is our Golgi apparatus, and this is really, really important for shipping and packaging all those proteins around the cell. If we delve a little bit further, we have centrioles, and this is going to be really, really important for mitosis and meiosis. We have the cytoskeleton, which provides skeletal structure and supports the cell along with the cytoplasm. We also have lysosomes, which can go through and degrade all of the necessary parts and all the worn out parts in the cell. It can also go through and digest things if it's a white blood cell consuming bacteria or viruses. We delve here, we have vesicles, and the vesicles are really, really important storage units. We have on the outside the cell membrane. And remember, cells have to regulate themselves. So that membrane is crucial, vitally crucial to ensure that regulation and homeostasis is maintained in our body and regulation is maintained in the cell. And then lastly, what we have is our cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is that jelly, viscous fluid that really goes through and gives animal cells its shape. Now, if we look at a plant cell, well, a plant cell is going to have a couple of different things. The most obvious thing to really see under a microscope is going to be the vacuoles. And these vacuoles are really, really crucial because plants are going to need a lot of water to go through photosynthesis. The second most obvious thing are going to be these green little stacks here, and these chloroplasts. And they're really, really crucial for photosynthesis in plant cells. And then lastly, well, plants are going to have a cell wall. Remember, plants don't really have a skeleton, so they have to have these cell walls, which create all of these bricks and subunits that really go through and help support the plant's structure. So a plant still has a plasma membrane. It still has a cell membrane to regulate stuff going in and out, but it also has to have that cell wall to go through and support the structure of the plant. Now, we really, really have to fundamentally understand surface area to volume. Now, let's say I have this three-dimensional cube here. Let's say I have 27 other cubes. So I do a 3 by 3 by 3 cube. Remember, we're thinking about this three-dimensionally. So there's two rows of these cubes behind what we're looking at. The cube on the left is just one solid cube. Well, which one has more surface area? Now, some people might say, well, they have the same surface area. And I would have to tell you that you are incorrect. They have the same volume, but not the same surface area. So we look at this cube. Remember, it only has 6 sides. Each one of the 27 cubes on the right-hand side has 6 sides. So if we think about this, we have a 30 micrometer length for the cube on the left, and then each one of the 27 cubes on the right has a 10 micrometer in length. Now if we were to calculate surface area here, well, the total surface area of one large cube on the left is 5,400 micrometers squared, whereas the surface area of the blocks on the right, well, the total surface area of the small cubes is going to be 16,200 micrometers squared. Now this is really, really important because all of those cells and all that surface area is necessary for osmosis and diffusion of materials. It's much easier to go through and osmote and diffuse materials into the cell the more surface area they have. Now the other important thing to understand here is if I have a cell that's very large, it's going to take a long time for me to get materials from where they need to be. If I have a very, very small cell, well, I can quickly get those materials to where they need to be in that cell. So the larger the surface area to volume, it's going to make it harder to diffuse. If we're creating smaller surface area to volume, it's going to make it easier to diffuse. Now don't get this confused with this example here. Remember, we have lots and lots of small cubes that have smaller surface area and they're easier to transport than one large cube. Remember, the total surface area of these 27 blocks is much larger than the total surface area of one large cube. But remember, each one of those little blocks is a 10 by 10 by 10. So if we're looking at this, it's much easier for us to go through and diffuse materials amongst the smaller cubes compared to this larger one. So, did you guys learn? Well, did you guys learn and review the cell theory? Did you guys go through and understand the surface to volume relationship? And then do you guys understand what an organelle is? And lastly, did you guys review some of the cell parts before we really delve into them in depth? This is going to be the end of the video. I will see you guys in class.